Right? Is that what we're holding? In Chayavin? Yeah, and the Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah and somebody. Okay. I think Hashem is able to learn Torah every day. In the schus of our learning, we should have basic English immediately. And we're learning also for Shlema, my father, and for Naftali ben Menuch Bela. Okay. By the way, Naftali got back to me yesterday. He heard on the share that I mentioned. Naftali must know if it's Rashi, if it's really Rashi or not. Give me a whole thing about this Rashi. Okay. The Mishnah says, "Ein chayaven ela al helam davar im shigas ma'aseh v'chein Mashiach." This seems to be like repetitive. We seem to be going over a law that we learned before already. That the Bezdin, the only time the Bezdin would have to bring their par, right? The par helam davar shel tzibur. The Bezdin would only have to bring that if first there was a helam davar. Helam davar means that they made a mistake in pshat, and shigas ma'aseh, and also that there was a mistake in the people followed that mistake, right? You need to have both. You need to have the psak and how do they translate psak over there? It's to be a verdict, a ruling, to issue a ruling, plus together with the action that the people followed. V'chein Mashiach. And the same thing is, we're talking about that the not the melech, but the kohen gadol, when he does an avera, it also has to be, when does he bring that par that he brings? That's only if first he issued a ruling, and then based on that ruling, he then followed. He then followed through, he then did the action, and then he would have to bring the par. Okay. And the Bezdin also doesn't have to bring Bezdin doesn't have to bring the korban for Avodah Zarah. What's that? What's the korban for Avodah Zarah? The par basar, the bull and the goat. They would bring that's only if they issued a ruling regarding Avodah Zarah, and then the people followed through. If you notice, in the first half of the Mishnah, it says that the Bezdin doesn't have to bring the korban unless there was a psak and then the people did the mistake, and it adds in v'chein haMashiach. And the same thing is for the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol over here is called Mashiach, the anointed one. And then the second case of the Mishnah, it says, the same thing with Avodah Zarah. First, you need to have the ruling, and then you need to have the action, the mistake that everyone does. And it doesn't finish off with V'chein Mashiach. It doesn't finish off with them. So we'll see in the Gemara. Overset? What do you mean oversight? What does oversight mean? Yeah, it must mean the ruling. Yeah. The Gemara now asks, Minalan, from where do we know that you need to have the mistaken ruling before the action in order for the sacrifice to be required? The Tana Rabbanan, because it was taught in a brisa, says in the pasuk Yishku. The pasuk says, "Vim kol adas Yisrael Yishku." If everyone makes a mistake, Yachol yochayav mal shigas ma'aser. Maybe Yishku just means what's it called? No, it's not a mistake. Erred. Inadvertent. It's not. It's when would they be? Maybe they'll be chayiv just with an inadvertent action. No, it's not just the yishku, the inadvertent action. You also need the v'nelam davar. You need to have that there was a mistake in the psak. There, what was an oversight? What did you translate that? That they also didn't paskin correctly. Because the pasuk adds in helam davar, v'nelam davar, we know that we need to have both. We add in the same thing applies to the Kohen Gadol when he is bringing his korban. The Kohen Gadol also needs to be like the rabbi making the psak, and then he has to do the action. Otherwise, he's not going to bring any korban, just if he makes a mistake. Where do we know about the Kohen Gadol? The ksiv lashmasam, or Mashiach katzibur. It says to the guilt of the people. that means that there's a comparison to the people, and that comparison to the people tells me that you need to have, just like for the community to have to bring the sacrifice, it needs to be both Helam Davar, mistake in the action, plus a mistake in the psak, plus Yishgu, it needs to be the mistake in the action. So too, by the Kain Gadol, you need to have both. Same with Avodah Zarah. You need to have, they have to paskin that there's a certain type of Avodah Zarah that it's permissible to serve. And then the people have to go and serve it. And that's when they're going to bring the carbon. What's the carbon for Avodah Zarah? Par v'sar. A bull and a goat. That's this carbon is only going to be if you have both a mistaken psak plus an action. Gemara says, Minola, and where do we know this? The Tanur Rabbanan, Stora in a Brisa. We know that the laws of Avodah Zarah have its own halachas. Maybe by Avodah Zarah, I could say that it's different than everything else, and I could say that by Avodah Zarah, they would be chayev if the entire congregation sins, even without a psak from the Bezdin. Nemerkan, so the pasuk says meyene v'nemalalan meyene. It says in the pasuk from the eyes of one says v'nelam davar meyne akol, that the people didn't realize. Another one says meyene ha'eda v'haya meyene ha'eda nesel shkaga, from the eyes of the congregation. So both we have twice it says eine, the eyes. Mala halan, just like by when it says nesa b'shkaga, that's talking about in Chayvan al Helam Davrim Shigas Maisa, just like when it says in Eida, when it's referring to the regular mitzvahs. So we know that it needs to have the mistake in the psak together with the mistake in the action, inadvertent action. Afkana in Chayvan al Helam Davrim Shigas Maisa. So too, when it comes to Avodah Zarah, we have the Gzeir Shava, Eine. You need to have the same malacha. First, you need to have a mistake in the psak, and then a mistake in the action. Okay, now the Gemara points out what we mentioned in the Mishnah, that if you notice, it's not perfectly symmetrical. The first part of the Mishnah says the same thing applies to the Mashiach, to the Kohen Gadol. Second part of the Mishnah, when it comes to Avodah Zarah, it doesn't say that the same law applies to the Kohen Gadol if the Kohen Gadol does Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara says, Masnisin Mani. Who could be the author of the Mishnah that says that when the Kohen Gadol does Avodah Zarah, it's different? It says, must be Rebbe. The opinion of Rebbe, the Tanya, when a Kohen Gadol, if a Kohen Gadol worships idols, Rebbe Yom Shigas Maisa, he only has to do the action, and he also is already chayav a carbon. Already has to bring the sacrifice. Chacham say no. Kohen Gadol bringing a carbon is only if he thinks that it's correct. And then he goes and based on his ruling, he says he goes ahead and does it. That's when he has to bring the carbon. So it's a machlekes Rebbe and the Chachamim. Now, since our Mishnah didn't mention that the Kohen Gadol needs to have the mistaken psak, probably the opinion of Rebbe. The Brisa goes on. It says v'shavin. Everyone agrees shabbeseira v'shavin shein maybe Hashem tali. Everyone agrees that what type of carbon does the Kohen Gadol bring? Brings a seira, which is not the carbon of the tzibur. The tzibur brings a par v'sar, a goat, a male goat, and a bull. And a regular person that sins brings a seira, a female goat. And now we're saying that the Kohen Gadol would have to bring the female goat as well, just like a regular. It's very complex here. You know, all the different animals. A chart would help. But in short, normally when someone does an avera and he has to bring a carbon chatas, a sin offering, so that sin offering is either a female sheep or a female goat. That's his options. Yes, you can go to the yard and take out one of those. Now we're saying if it's Avodah Zarah, then he only has one option. It's the goat, the female goat. It can't be the female sheep. Then we go to the Bezdin and to the Nasi and to the Kohen Gadol. There, we're dealing with a par. Well, the Nasi is a sar, also a male goat. But if it's the Bezdin has to bring it, and the Kohen Gadol, let's bring a bull. cow. It's a different family, right? So now, and if it's avodah zarah, the Beis Din brings a par v'sar, two korbanos. Okay, so now the Gemara says, "B'tizbara, do you really think that this is the diuk that you made is accurate?" I think what the Gemara means over here is that if you look at the next Mishnah, it also leaves out when it says that avodah zarah has to be done by an action that was zedaini kares shegasechatas. It also leaves out b'chein Mashiach, and over there, we know that it really applies to the. So this Gemara says like this: Elataniha hu adin laha. Rather, it says this, and it applies to the Kohen Gadol as well. So therefore, over here we can say the same thing. That when we said Mashiach in the first case, we're really referring to the second case as well. And both of them need to have a psak and then the helam davar and then the shiggas ma'ase. You need to have both together. So the diuk of our Mishnah, that our Mishnah is like Rebbe, is not accurate. My time with the Rebbe, what is the reason for Rebbe that he says that the Kohen Gadol does not need to have the helam davar, to have the mistake in the psak in order for this carbon? The pasuk says, the Kohen will atone. He's talking about for avodah zarah. The Kohen will atone for the person that sinned when he sinned inadvertently. Now it says the person that sinned, it says nefesh hashegeges. A nefesh, the soul that sinned, is Mashiach. He's adding in that it's referring to even the Kohen Gadol. That's the soul. Which means that you don't need to have the psak along with it. It's just like a regular person that sinned by avodah zarah. Shegeges and nasi. And if the king sins, the same thing applies. Cheta b'shkaga, when they sin inadvertently. Rabbi savar chetza b'shkaga. Rebbe holds that this is only if it's inadvertently. Rabbanan Sabri Mishachatase Bishkaga. The Rabbanan say no. The Chate Bishkaga is telling me, it's talking about the individual, that if he would sin Bishkaga, then he would bring a Mishachatase Bishkaga. Then he would have to bring a karban. But this is coming to exclude Yatzah Mashiach Shein Chatase Bishkaga Ela Behelam Davar. It's coming to exclude the Kohen Gadol. That comes to exactly the opposite. Then Gadol would only bring it if he also has a mistake in the psak. Now the Gemara says, V'shavin Shabbasir, everyone holds that instead of bringing what the community would have to bring if they worship idols, which would be a par v'sar, a bull and a goat, over here they only bring a female goat. Kiyachid, just like a regular individual. Minalan, where do we know this from? The Makra, the pasuk says, if one soul sins, echad, Yachid, Vechad, Nasi, Vechad, Mashiach, Kulam, Bechal, Nefesh Achasin. The one soul is coming to include all of these possibilities. It could be a regular individual, it could be a king, it could be a Kohen Gadol. All of them are all under the category of one soul, and they have to bring the karban of the female goat for the avodah zarah. Something like that. Okay. We're on top of page Ches. None of the Gemara is not hard. It's just like a little repetitive. So it's like a lot of these halachas we went over already. Now, like the source for it and distinctions between this and that. B'shavin means that Rebbe and the Chachamim would agree. She'ein maybe Ashim Tali, that the Kohen Gadol doesn't bring an Ashim Tali. An Ashim Tali is a type of karban where if a person did a sin, it would require him to bring a karban chatas, which would be the female sheep or the female goat. But he's not sure that he did the sin. He ate something on the table, he doesn't know what it was. Was it the forbidden fat, or was it the kosher one? So then, until he finds out for sure, just to keep him from getting punished from heaven, so he can bring us an offering called an Ashim Tali that sort of protects him until. So he's saying now that everyone agrees that the Kohen Gadol does not bring a karban like this. Well, if he sins on purpose, that's a different story. By avodah zarah or mistaken psak, that was the discussion before. But he doesn't bring an Asham Tali. Minalan, how do we know this? The Ksiv, it says in the pasuk, "V'chipar alav akain al shigdas asher shagag." This is, we quoted the pasuk before, right? Same pasuk. V'chipar akain al nefesh hashigegas. No, there's a new pasuk. Let me see. It's chapter 5. 518. All right. Okay. That's why if you learn on the phone, you click and it takes you to the thing. One of the benefits. But on Safaria, if you use Safaria, you can click, hold your finger on a word, and it opens up a dictionary. If you hold down one word in the Hebrew, it opens up all the languages. Okay, so what did he tell me? It was 5 what? 518. Okay, now we're talking about the Asham Tali, the guilt offering in a case of doubt. A person is uncertain if he sinned by transgressing of God's commandments, which are prohibited by the. Okay, he should bring to the priest a perfect, unblemished ram from the flock. What's this? Ayel tamim minatzayin berk chalashim alakayin v'chipar alavaken shagas esher shagag v'hula yadav v'nesachai. And the kayin will then make an atonement for his unintentional sin, which he may have committed, and he should be forgiven. It is a guilt offering, for he has become guilty before God. Okay, now, so we have to figure out that this is only by a regular individual and not by the Kohen Gadol. Rebbe learns it like this: Misha kol chete b'shgaga. Only someone that all his sins are always going to be inadvertently. As opposed to the Kohen Gadol, that in order for him to bring a chatas, it can't just be an inadvertent sin. It has to also be by the oversight in psak, in the ruling. So it doesn't apply. This passage doesn't apply to him because he has other complications in order for him to have to bring that korban chatas. He's exempt from an inadvertent, I don't want to confuse the two things. There's two types of inadvertent. There's inadvertent that he did a avera, but he didn't realize, he didn't do it on purpose. He did it inadvertently. Then there's an unbeknownst to him inadvertent. He's not sure if he even did that, right? What do they call that? In the case of doubt, they just say, in the case of doubt, there's the inadvertent in doubt. Now he's exempt from that because since his actual korban is actual korban chatas, inadvertent chatas, doesn't come if he just doesn't mistake an inadvertent sin. It has to come together with the ruling. And so the Asham Tali is only for someone that has to bring the chatas by just the inadvertent sin. So Yatzah, okay. Midei kol ksiv. The Gemara asks, Rebbe, the way Rebbe's learning it is that all his chatas is only if it's just inadvertent. Does it say the word all? It says in. What does it say? In or ain? What do you have with it? Do you have a? Let me read it in this.
Ain.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Does it say kol? And it's Midei kol ksiv? Over here they write in. Yes. It means yes.
I know. In you normally means yes, but here he wrote ain.
It says all is written.
If in it by itself and like different words, and it means yes, the other one.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. It means if there's a comma after the word ain, whether you read it as ain or in, it doesn't matter. It always means yes. Now, how do you know if the comma's there? That you have to know from context. So, let it just write for his inadvertent sin. Why does it have to teach us that he performed inadvertently? Asher shagag. Kamash malan. It's coming to teach us that the eka kol cheta b'shgaga yatzim mashiach shein kol cheta b'shgaga ela b'avei dezara. We get Rebbe's full opinion here again. That Rebbe says that by the Kohen Gadol, the only time he has to bring a carbon chatas by an inadvertent sin would only be by avodah zarah, but not by a regular sin. By a regular sin, he would have to issue a ruling, also a mistaken ruling, and then follow through. So because it has the extra word ashishagag that he performed inadvertently, that teaches us that all the other ones, that the only time he would bring an asham tali would be someone that all he needs is an inadvertent sin, as opposed to the Kohen Gadol, that also it needs the ruling to have to bring the carbon. Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan say? How do they understand this? Well, they add in, I think the Rabbanan is much easier. Rabbanan say that Kohen Gadol never brings a carbon unless there was a ruling. It was Rebbe that had sometimes he does by avodah zarah. That was Rebbe's opinion by avodah zarah, that if the Kohen Gadol inadvertently sins even without issuing a ruling, he has to bring the carbon. The Rabbanan didn't hold that. The Rabbanan say, "Mi shechata b'shkaga yatz Mashiach shein chata b'shkaga lei ba'avodah zarah v'lei b'shar mitzvah ela be'elam davar m'shikas ma'aseh." Only a asham tali is only brought by someone that has to bring a chatas if he inadvertently sins, as opposed to the Kohen Gadol that doesn't bring a chatas if he inadvertently sins. He only brings a chatas if he issues a ruling and then inadvertently sins. Okay. Ein bezin chayavin is new Mishnah here. Ein bezin chayavin at sheyoru b'davar shezdayin ikars v'shegagasei chatas. The only time that the court has to bring, the bezdin has to bring a carbon when they make a mistake in psak, and then the congregation follows through, majority of the congregation, is if that mistake in psak was something that if the people did it on purpose would be karis, and if they did it inadvertently, it would be a chatas. That, in other words, that category sin. Mashiach, and the same, by the way, that's the rule. That kol shezdayin karis shegasei chatas. When does a person have to bring a carbon chatas? If there would be karis if he did it on purpose. That's the general rule. So, and the same thing applies to the Kohen Gadol, that he would only have to bring the carbon, the par, the bull, if he sins by mistake, only if he issued a ruling as well. And that ruling and the mistake need to be regarding something that would have been kares if it was on purpose. Now we say, the same thing applies to avodah zarah. That when would the court have to bring the carbon for avodah zarah, which is a par b'sar, that's only if the way they paskin in avodah zarah would have been a violation of that rule, would have been kares if it was done on purpose. Minalan, how do we know that it needs to be a kares sin that's going to have a shagatas, that's we're going to have this halacha? The Tanya was taught in a brayso, Rebbe Yomer. Rebbe says, Nemer kan aleh, says on her, Nemer la alon aleh. It says another place on her, or that. One of these is Ashechata Aleha. What's the first one? Is 414. It says the communal sin offering. This is if everyone sins based on the psak of the bezdin. And in 14 it says B'noida hachatas. And then when the sin which they have committed becomes known, the congregation should bring a young bull as a sin offering. So B'noida hachatas shechatu aleha. The sin which they have committed becomes known. Shechatu aleha, that they sinned on it. It has this word on it. Okay, so it says aleha. Now we have another aleha in 1818, not the year. And this is talking about the forbidden marriages. Now here it says that a man should not marry two sisters. So in 18 it says, which means you must not take a woman in marriage in addition to her sister, to make them rivals by uncovering one's nakedness in addition to the others. Aleha, to the others. So it says Aleha and Aleha. Okay. Now what's type of Aveira is it to marry two sisters? That's just like marrying two sisters is Isser Karis. Afghans, also when we're talking about the Aveira that the Bezdin is issuing a ruling about, it also has to be something of Karis. Ashkechan Tzibur. You got it all worked out when it comes to the issue of the Bezdin regarding the community. Karban. Mashiach Minalan, how do we know that the Kohen Gadol has the same halachas, that it's only going to be a Karban if it's ruling about something that's Karis? So we go back to say what we said before, Lash Masa'am. We said that the guilt of the people, when he sins to the guilt of the people, the Kohen Gadol, so we have a comparison, Harei Mashiach Katzibar. Whatever the ruling was by, whatever the qualifications are for the tzibur to bring the karban, that applies also to the Kohen Gadol. Nasi, what about the melech, if the king sins? So we say yalef mitzvahs. We learn from the Gzeir Shava, the verbal analogy between the word mitzvahs. Ksiv gabi nasi, it says regarding the melech, ba'asa achas mikol mitzvahs Hashem, and he performs one of the commandments of Hashem, which is not to be performed, which means he violates it. And it says, in the pasuk that we had before, Perik Dalet, that it says, and they'll do one of the commandments, we learn a verbal analogy, a Gzeir Shava to the tzibur, to the melech, and it needs to be something that's that if it was done intentionally, there would be kares. Yachid. Yes, now we're asking, how do we know that every karban chatas is brought only for something that would have been done? If it was done b'mezid, intentionally, there would be kares. So it says, Amakra v'im nefesh, and if a soul. It says and. Now this is in Perik Daled, pasuk Chaf Zayin. So there's three paragraphs here in a row in Perik Daled. One is if the congregation sins. The next one is if the leader sins, which is referring to the nasi. And then right after that is if a regular person sins. Gemara says that what we're going to do is, it says v'im nefesh, and if a soul sin, that vav, that yilmad tachtan mi'elyan, we're going to learn the lower paragraph. Lower means that it was said later, because in the column it's lower. The lower one from the higher one, yilmad tachtan mi'elyan, that just like the upper ones, the two paragraphs before, which was the nasi and the tzibur, the congregation, all needed to be Zedayne Kares.
That's a ruling in Gzeir Shava?
Yeah, if it says above, there's a vav. Sometimes the Gemara says yeah, Yelme Tachten Me'elyan or Elyan Tachten. You can go both ways. Okay, now the Gemara says, it comes to Avodah Zarah, it's only if they paskin about something that's Shigagasei Zedayne Kares Shigagasei Chatas. Avodah Zarah Minalan, how do we know that this applies to Avodah Zarah? Tanarabanan, because we have a brisa. Looks like the same brisa that we quoted before. Because Avodah Zarah is unique. It has its own halachas. Maybe Yechayev by Avodah Zarah even by something that's not Zedayne Kares and Shigagasei Chatas. Nemakan me'enei v'nemalalan me'enei. Say no, that we have the Gzeir Shava of me'enei. Just like by Avodah Zarah it says that it was me'enei Eidar, me'enei Hakol, one of them, and also by the congregation that sins, the community that sins, the assembly, it says me'enei Eidar or me'enei Hakol. Okay. Ashkechan Tzibur Yachid Nasi. We've worked it out for the case of the community. We worked it out for the case of the individual, and we worked it out also for the melech. That it needs to be zedaini kares or shigdasei chatas. That if it was done intentionally, there would be kares, and unintentionally, inadvertently, would be a karban chatas, and that's when we're going to have these halachas. Well, Mashiach Minalan. How do we know that the same thing applies to the Kohen Gadol? So it says Amakra v'im nefesh achas. Pasuk says, and if one soul sins. Well, this is by Avodah Zarah. Later on, this is in Parsha Shlach, I think. It says, whatever the case is, it says the nefesh achas. It's coming to teach me that echad yachid v'echad nasi v'echad Mashiach kulam bechlal nefesh achasin. All of them go under the category of one soul, and v'yom metachton mi'elyon. And we learn this lower. What's the lower one? The one in Parsha Shlach, me'elyon, going back all the way to Vayikra.
First mentioned individual, and after it mentioned dogs.
But now we're going
The lower
backwards.
one is in Bamidbar.
The lower one is in Bamidbar, and the upper one is back in Vayikra.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where's that? Does it describe over there where the upper one is?
Opening verse, taking the idolatry by an individual, it immediately follows the passage.
Oh, okay. So no. Very good. One of the things that they used to teach us in yeshiva, which we don't do so much nowadays, is that if you have a question, you have to get up from your seat and get the book and open it up and look it up. And today, we're much more lazy. Not like go to the shelf and get it. But turns out, what chapter in Bamidbar is it? 15. Turns out that usually when you spend the time getting it, it saves you time. So we're dealing with 15. What pasuk was it? 15:27.
Well, here's just 24.
24. Okay. So take a look at this.
Which one is it?
It starts. It's the paragraph starts on 22, and it goes to.
Both wrong.
No, 1 second. No, you're not wrong, because the Be'im Nefesh Achas is pasuk 27. So the paragraph starts on 22, and it says that if he makes a mistake and he doesn't do this is talking, if you will inadvertently commit a sin of idolatry, which is equivalent to not observing all the commandments which Hashem spoke to Moshe, then if the inadvertent sin was because of mistaken ruling in the judges, so then they're going to have to bring a par ben bakar and a goat, like we spoke about, right? Then it goes on, and in pasuk, yes, together with a mistake.
For like 12, everything else. Congregation.
Yeah, that was a discussion. That was a discussion. If every congregation, if every tribe does it, or if it's just like one for everyone. That was Machlekes for Meir, Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, right? Now in pasuk 27 it says, and if an individual person does it, if one person sins, then he's going to have to bring a seira for Avodah Zarah. So what we're doing now is we're saying that just like back before it had to be because the back by the community, so too by the individual, the sin has to be Zidani Karas. Is only then is he going to bring Shigagasei Chatas. The Yalamed Tachtain Mina Elyon. The Elyon over here, the one that we said about the Tzibur, that they're going to have to bring the karban for Avodah Zarah. That's teaching me to the later case of the individual in Parshas Shlach. It says now, before we had Aleha to teach me the Daily Karash Gasichata. Why? Because we learned from a person marrying two sisters that that's a sin of intentionally is karis, and unintentionally it's a chatas. That's what we learned from there. And from aleha, that the word that it says by the sisters, we take it over to the other karbanas, right? Aleha, aleha. The Gemara says this is only according to the opinion that learns from aleha. However, if you go to Masechta Yavamas over there, it says that the word aleha is coming to teach me that a halacha regarding Yavama. Tsaris means the two wives of a single person. They're called tsaris. Tsaris. So that's probably where the word comes from. The Yiddish word tsaris comes from. So they're using it up for another halacha that it says in the Masechta Yavamas that the tzara it also becomes prohibited to do yibam if you can't marry one of the wives. If you can't do yibam on one of the wives because of a relation that wife is related, the husband dies. The brother steps in to do yibam. He says, "But I can't marry that one because she's related to me." So it says you can't marry the other one either. And we learned the Gemara uses the word aleha in that discussion. So according to the Rabbanan that use the word aleha to teach me something else, so how do they know over here that aleha is coming to teach me? So it says nafkala midamasnila Rabbi Shua ben Levi lebrei. They have another the pshat. They learn it the way Rabbi Shua ben Levi taught his son. It says terachas yelachem leisa b'shkagam nefsher tasbiyad rama. It says that there's one law for everyone that does an inadvertent mistake and for the person that does it intentionally with the upraised hand. It's referring to idolatry. It says that the whole Torah is compared to Avodah Zarah. Ma Avodah Zarah shechayav al zdei nekaros v'asher gasei chatas. Afkan says shechayav al zdei nekaros v'asher gasei chatas. So we learn from Avodah Zarah that Avodah Zarah that's done intentionally is kares, and unintentionally is a chatas. So we learn to the rest of the Torah also that when you're going to bring the chatas, it's going to be if it's intentionally would it be kares. Ashkan Yachud Nasi Mashiach Bein Baved Zar Bein Mishar Mitzvah Tibur Minalan. We have a source for this for all the individuals, but not for the tzibur. Now the Gemara says Yalaf Eliyam Mitachtan. We're going to learn once we know it from the individual. We'll take it back to teach me by the tzibur. Rabbi Hadi Rabbi Shua ben Levi Mayavale. What does Rabbi do with Rabbi Shua ben Levi? Now, because Rabbi said that Kain Gadol doesn't need to have the psak. Let me see what this means. Why is there an issue with Rabbi? The Kain Gadol. What we learned from Rebbe was that. No, I'm mixing this up. I was mixing up with the other Rebbe. One thing we learned from Rebbe was that there was a machlekes if the Kain Gadol needs to paskin. That was one thing. But no, Rebbe was the one that told us aleha. I'm going simply on the aleha. So if I have Rabbi Shua ben Levi, so what do I need the aleha? So if I have Rabbi Shua ben Levi, so what does Rebbe? So then I don't need aleha. But Rebbe that uses aleha, what does he do with Rabbi Shua ben Levi? The Torah achas yelachem. He uses it for another brayse. It says because I know that the pasuk makes a distinction between if there's a lot of people that did the Aveira or if there's individuals. Here we're talking about by Avodah Zarah. If an entire city worships Avodah Zarah, they become an Yer Nidachas. If you have a whole chart, becomes an Yer Nidachas. And the halacha of a Yer Nidachas is that everyone gets killed by the sword, and also all the money of the city is destroyed. Yechidim, if there's individuals that did Avodah Zarah, then they don't get killed by the sword, rather they get stoned, and their money is saved. It goes to the family. Maybe there should be a different carbon between a lot of people doing the Aveira or if a few people. So that's what Rebbe uses, Rabbi Shua ben Levi's pasuk for, to teach me that the carbon for Avodah Zarah is that chatas or whatever, that it doesn't matter if it's a lot of people, or individuals. When it's inadvertent. Maskevler of Chilkim Agrina, time by Chilak Akasav. Rab Chilkia of Hagronia, he asked the following question. Taima, what's the reason why there's the same carbon if it's the community or if it's an individual that did Avodah Zarah? That's because the pasuk didn't make any distinction. Achilek. But if there would have been a distinction, then Havamin and Nechalik, then we would say that you would have to bring a different carbon. My nicey, which carbon would the community bring? So, I'm sorry, which carbon, or in what way would the carbon be different? So let's say nicey par. So let's say that they would bring the bull offering. It says, 1 second, that's exactly the carbon that the community brings. And it wouldn't be anything different. So it said, Naisi par lachatas. So it says, but that's what they bring for Avodah Zarah. Naisi sir, let's just bring a goat. So it says, Nasi b'shar mitzvahs, that's what the Nasi brings. He brings a goat. Naisi seira, let's just bring a regular female goat. So it says, Yachid nami hainu karbani. That's one of the options for a Yachid. So, Alma la yitzchach. Alama la yitzchach. Why do we say that it has to do with the comparison? We wouldn't have. It would have to be like this anyway. So it says salkadait chaminitib ma'isi parla l'v'sar l'chatas ani naisi ibcha parla l'chatas l'v'sar l'oila inami tzarech vein leitakana. We would say that either the community would do exactly the opposite. When it comes to Avodah Zarah, instead of having the goat for the chatas, we would have the goat for the oila. Or maybe they had to bring a sacrifice, but there was no sacrifice that they could bring. So Kamash Malana comes to teach us that they actually bring exactly the same one. Okay, let me go to the Mishnah. This section in Parsha Shlach doesn't actually say that they did Avodah Zarah. But here it starts off with, if the people will not perform all the mitzvahs. It doesn't say Avodah Zarah. The Kuli al Mamiyas Kiksi V'Hani Kroi B'Avodah Zarah Udiksivi. Those psukim were written about Avodah Zarah. My mashma, how do you know that? Amarava V'Tem Rabbi Shua ben Levi Amarla Kedi. Here's a Kedi. We don't have Kedi so often. Kedi, according to some, means an unattributed source. Or Rashi says in some places that it means Shem Chacham, that it was actually someone's name. His name was Kedi. Anyway, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, if someone will be mistaken and he won't do all of the mitzvahs. Which mitzvahs is it talking about? And when it says he doesn't do anything, this is Avodah Zarah. It concludes, it says that Hashem spoke to Moshe right after. All the mitzvahs that Hashem said to Moshe, Uksiv also says that Hashem Aleichem biyad Moshe. It says that I commanded you through Moshe. So it says he commanded to Moshe and he commanded through Moshe. Which mitzvah did we hear directly from Hashem, and we also heard through Moshe, right? So Avodah Zarah. This must be Avodah Zarah, the Tana Rabbi Shmuel, because we're taught in the Brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, that the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments we heard from Hashem. So the Rabbi Shmuel Tana, it was taught in the Brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, from the day that Hashem commanded you and onward throughout all your generations. It's a mitzvah. Which mitzvah was said at the beginning of all the mitzvahs? So Haviyamer is Avodah Zarah. You say that this was Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says, 1 second. We had 10 commands, even 10 mitzvahs, even before we got to the Aseres Adibras. Rather, what we're going to do is we're going to say that the answers that we gave before of how we know that it's referring to Avodah Zarah, we'll learn what's the tradition. We had two possibilities, either like Rabbi Shua ben Levi, or like Rebbe that we're learning from Aleha, or from Rabbi Shua ben Levi, which said, what was his Rabbi Shua ben Levi's? Okay, let's leave it over here. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.
Yeah. Right here.
We have to figure out during the week. It's going to be a little bit different. Sunday is fine. Sunday we can learn at 6. But during the week, there's going to be the slichas the whole week. They're going to say slichas at 6 o'clock. I guess we'll do, instead of 5:30, we would go back to 5:15. 5:15 to 6. Try to start on time. 5:15. During the week. That's Monday, Tuesday. This coming week is going to be 5:15 instead of 5:30. Or else we'll only have a half hour. We won't make it. All right. Got it, Josh?
Need to say slichos?
We say it for everyone else.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Yeah.